Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 12. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
I'm Andy Chapman, and I've been a professional archaeologist for over 50 years now. I'm retired, but I'm still involved with Northamptonshire Archaeological Society, so I'm still involved in talking about archaeology and publishing both my excavations and other people's excavations, so I haven't managed to escape it yet.
A love of the art and a love of the business in that case.
I suppose so, yes, but a lot of professional archaeologists started when they were very young. I'm slightly different to that. My interest, I went to study physics at university, and I wanted to become a professional astronomer. But while at university, I went on a summer dig and rather enjoyed it. So when it came time to leave, it was either get a proper job or give this archaeology a go. So I said, I'll give it 12 months, see what happens. And 50 years later, I'm still doing it. So.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yes.
All of which leads us to this particular object. What object are we talking about?
We're talking here about a Bronze Age Beaker pot. And my personal association with that is that I excavated this object back in about October 1986, actually underneath a medieval village. We'd gone there to excavate the deserted medieval village of Westcott and Raunds, and as a bonus, underneath the village we had part of a prehistoric burial complex, including this lovely Bronze Age burial mound, 3 ditches. We actually had part of the mound still surviving underneath the medieval building, so a rare opportunity to excavate something like this, and a total surprise.
Well, exactly. You weren't anticipating finding something like that. Tell me about the Beaker.
So the Beaker, it's probably, I think I'd say that the iconic object from prehistoric archaeology, not just in Britain, but across Europe. There's all sorts of different pottery styles, but the Beaker is universal. You find them from down into Spain, across to Poland. So it's an object that turns up right across the whole of Europe. And they're just so well made. A lot of prehistoric pottery is rather thick-walled, and the Beakers are thin-walled, highly decorated with all these panels in pressed work. So they're lovely objects to look at, and they're universally this red to sort of orangey, yellowy, orangey colour. So they're all very distinctive. And I think a lot of people who know very little about prehistory, they'd probably heard of the Beaker people. And of course, uniquely, you have a whole culture named after their pots because they're just so distinctive.
So this is artisan production we're talking about?
Yes, they're each one is a one-off. They're not being turned out, factory made in that sense. Each one is, and I suspect a lot of them, perhaps some of them, may even be made specifically for a particular burial.
Well, yes, this is what I was going to come to. The functionality of the Beaker. In this day and age, Beaker has a different kind of colloquialism associated with it. This Beaker is not one of those.
No. Quite what they were used for. I know people have talked about them holding alcoholic drinks. Perhaps they did. What sort of thing it's difficult to prove. But if you were an important person in that period, we're talking the early Bronze Age, in this country, 2500 to around about 2000 BC. You're an important person, you're being buried under a round barrow, you would have a Beaker with you as part of your grave goods. So they are a universal object. This particular burial was also accompanied by a lovely flint dagger. There was a lathe-turned jet button that went with it, and also there's a large flint flake and various other objects. Up by the hands, there was a little flint knife. And these are tightly bound burials. They're crouched burials, so drawn up tightly and probably tied in place. So they placed a little flint knife to cut themselves free in the afterlife.
So the Beaker is decorated. It's decorated in a unique way.
Each one is just about each one is unique.
So would the decoration have been more to do with the person that formed it and made it, or would the decoration have related to the person buried with it?
Now there's a question, isn't it? If only we knew the answers to those sort of things. I suspect it's the potter themselves who has a style of decoration, but each one will come out slightly different. You
mentioned the Beaker people as a generic term. What do we understand about their sophistication and where they were taking society in that era?
The important thing they brought across Europe and to Britain was metallurgy. They knew how to smelt copper turn it into bronze, and also, of course, gold as well. So metallurgy came to these islands through the Beaker people, and of course they spread it across Europe before that.
So were the Beaker people indigenous to Britain, or did they come from mainland Europe and into what we now call the United Kingdom?
This has been argued about for decades by archaeologists. At one point, it was back in the 50s, they were seen as invaders. As you move into the 70s, it's seen as a cultural package. From modern DNA work, there are people involved. There are people moving across Europe, bringing the metallurgy with them. And the DNA evidence suggests that the population the old population rapidly is replaced by these dynamic Beaker people who are sweeping across Europe, and they become the main drivers of society.
Would a Beaker people community have had numerous potters, or would they have just had one who would be a recognised person of standing within the community?
I suspect to make the sort of pots that went into burials, they would be a fairly small group. They are very well made. There are also what we call domestic beakers, which are much thicker walled and crude, the sort of pottery they were using in their daily life. So I suspect this was probably the best potters. Although saying that, of course, you always put the best ones in the textbooks. If you actually start looking at beakers, there are some very badly made beakers as well, but they don't tend to get photographed and put in the books.
Everybody has to start somewhere. So this particular beaker, from your perspective as an archaeologist, is this representative of the craft? Is this the top end of the craft, or is this somebody who is perhaps
this is
developing their skills?
This is certainly up towards the top end. It's a very well made beaker. In terms of Northamptonshire, part of the importance, I think, of putting the beaker forward to represent one of these 100 objects was that if you go back to the old histories of Northamptonshire, which are still being repeated certainly in the 60s and 70s, and you still hear it today, Northamptonshire and the Midlands in general was always seen as a sort of prehistoric wasteland. You went down to Wessex and you had all these wonderful barrows on the hillside, and nothing like that in the Midlands, so we were obviously hardly anybody lived here. What they were forgetting, of course, is that Northamptonshire and the whole Midlands has had 2,000 years of agriculture, of ploughing. And once you get into aerial photography in the 1960s, suddenly they all start popping up along the river valleys. So we had them all along. We had a very rich prehistoric lifestyle in Northamptonshire. Lots of people were living here and dying here. But of course, most traces of them were ploughed away long ago. So the importance of the excavations from the 60s onwards, including this one, is we've been telling that story and turning the record round. Northamptonshire wasn't a wasteland. It had a population through the Neolithic and Bronze Ages, and they were doing the same things they were doing in Wessex and up in Orkney.
Andy, we're recording in the offices of the Ark. In fact, you might be able to hear a few voices from time to time during the course of our recording. We are sitting on top of a Roman city at the moment. It's agricultural land and floodplain down towards the Nen, which we can see from where we are recording today. There's obviously evidence of lots of community, lots of diversity along the line of the Nen, or the Nene, depending on which end and which direction you're headed. Does that make Northamptonshire a significant part of what is now the United Kingdom, what is now Great Britain? Do we perhaps have a story to tell that hasn't been told before?
We have our own story to tell, I suppose, is the point. And it's been very neglected. Certainly the prehistoric side of it hasn't been appreciated because people couldn't see the evidence. And now, in the recent decades, that evidence has been coming through. And of course, the wonderful thing about, the Nen Valley and the other river valleys of the Midlands, it's all wonderful farmland. So people have been living here for all through that period and farming it. And so yes, you have this depth of occupation that goes through from Neolithic, Bronze Age, Iron Age, and then into the Roman period and beyond.
And through the Beaker people, we have sophistication in terms of not only how you live, but also how you deal with death as well.
Yes, we do. Before that, in the Neolithic, you have the communal burial in long barrows, but clearly it moves on to a whole new level in the Bronze Age, where you've got very much a sense of the individual. Clearly, these were important people under their own burial mound. Often other burials were brought in later. It turns to cremation later on, so you get pots inserted into the mounds, but they may well be their descendants anyway. So certainly you have people who consider themselves to be important, but they were also considered to be important by their contemporaries, because that's a big investment of time into the barrow we did up at where this beaker came from, about 35 metres in diameter. There's 3 ditches surrounding it, so it's not just a single act. They dig a ditch, he's buried in the middle. Sometime later there's a second ditch, the mound's enlarged, and then later on there's a third ditch and the mound's enlarged again. So it's a monument that's there and developed over a period of perhaps 100 years or so.
You are the man who found this particular beaker. Literally, you dug it up. You are absolutely the person to tell us about it. What is your personal reaction to it? Is it an echo of the past? Is it a sense of wonderment at the detail of the beaker? How do you feel about it?
It's difficult to put that into words. It's a long time ago now, but certainly at the time, yes, as I say, it fulfilled an ambition of mine was to dig one of these Bronze Age round barrows and find the burial in the middle with the skeleton laid out with its grave goods was a special point in my career because it was something I'd always seen in textbooks, and there I was actually doing it. So for me, it was a very special moment uncovering that burial and all those grave goods, including the beaker.
Well, lost to telescopes and heavenly bodies, but at least instead we have you telling the story of our past through objects and artefacts as this that you've put into the exhibition. It's great that it's in the exhibition. Thank you for telling me the story of the beaker today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.